What if the person you trusted most was secretly plotting to take everything from you? A millionaire, pen in hand, seconds away from signing a contract that would seal his fate. And just when it seemed too late, a maid, trembling, terrified, burst into the room and shouted, "Don't sign it, please!" What happened next shocked everyone and revealed a betrayal deeper than anyone could imagine. The mansion on the hill stood like a fortress of glass and stone, overlooking the wealthy suburbs of Los Angeles. That morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Carter residence, bouncing off polished marble floors and filling the rooms with a sterile kind of brilliance. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, quiet and uneventful, yet beneath the silence, something sinister was brewing. Michael Carter, a 48-year-old self-made millionaire, sat at the grand mahogany desk in his office. His shoulders were stiff, his back straight, as though the weight of the decision before him pressed down like a stone. A thick contract lay open on the desk, its legal jargon swimming before his tired eyes. For days, Michael had slept poorly, haunted by unease he couldn't name. Still, this morning, he had convinced himself that signing the papers would settle everything. He adjusted his cufflinks, smoothed his white dress shirt, and lifted a sleek black pen. Beside him stood his wife, Olivia. She was immaculate, as always, her blonde hair drawn into a neat bun, her silk dress clinging perfectly to her figure, her perfume heavy and sweet. She smiled, but the corners of her mouth twitched, betraying a nervous tension she fought to conceal. She fiddled with the diamond on her ring finger, the stone catching the sunlight and scattering it across the desk. To Michael, her smile was reassurance. To others, it might have looked like a mask slipping. In the hallway, Emily Ross stood frozen. She was the maid, a 32-year-old single mother, dressed in her plain navy uniform, with a rag still clutched in her hand. She had been cleaning the oak floors when she heard the low murmur of voices from the office. She hadn't planned to intrude. She never would have dared under normal circumstances. But now, as she peeked inside and saw Michael's pen hovering above the paper, her heart thudded so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. Sweat dampened her brow despite the steady hum of the air conditioning. For 3 nights she had wrestled with herself, torn between fear and conscience. She had overheard something, a phone call that should never have reached her ears. It had revealed a truth so dangerous that keeping silent felt like betrayal, but speaking it aloud could cost her everything. Every step toward the office door felt like stepping off a cliff. Michael exhaled and lowered the pen, the tip touching the paper. That was the moment Emily's body moved before her mind could stop it. She shoved the door open and shouted, her voice ripping through the heavy stillness. "Don't sign it!" The cry was so sharp, so desperate it shattered the silence like breaking glass. Michael froze, the pen hovering above the signature line. His head jerked upward, eyes narrowing as they locked on Emily. For an instant, he didn't seem to recognize her, as if the woman in the doorway was a ghost risen from nowhere. Olivia spun around, her face flashing with alarm, before she quickly masked it with indignation. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped forward, chin raised high. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice trembling between outrage and fear. Emily's knees shook as she stepped inside, still clutching the rag in one hand like a lifeline. Her chest heaved, her breath ragged. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, Mr. Carter. Don't sign that contract." The air thickened with tension. Michael pushed his chair back slowly, standing tall, the pen still clutched in his fist. His gaze bore into Emily, searching her face for answers. Olivia's hands settled on her hips, her polished composure fraying at the edges. "Emily," she snapped, her voice like a whip. "Have you lost your mind? Why are you screaming like this?" Emily's mouth was dry. Her entire body trembled, but she forced the words out anyway. "Because I know what this is. I heard you, Mrs. Carter. I heard you talking to someone about this contract. You said once he signed it, everything, this house, the cars, the company, would be yours alone, and that you'd leave. With him." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Olivia's laugh was sharp, brittle, a desperate attempt to dismiss the accusation. "This is absurd," she said, turning to her husband. Michael, please. She's fabricating this nonsense to cover some mistake. Are you really going to believe the maid? But Emily pressed forward, tears burning at her eyes, though her voice grew steadier. You said he'd lose everything. You said he trusted you too much, that he wouldn't even read the fine print. Please, sir. She's lying to you. This contract is a trap. Michael's grip tightened on the pen. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the two women. He wanted to dismiss it, wanted to believe his wife, but there was a hollow echo in his gut, a voice he had been ignoring for weeks. Do you understand what you're accusing my wife of? His tone was low, dangerous. Emily only nodded, her lips trembling. Olivia stepped closer, her hand brushing her husband's arm with practiced tenderness. Michael, listen to me, she murmured. She's trying to poison you against me. You know me. You know my heart. Don't let her lies ruin everything. Michael looked at Emily again, searching her eyes for truth. He saw fear, desperation, but also conviction. He looked at Olivia, who stood elegant and composed, her beauty glowing like a shield. For a moment, his mind spun, torn between two realities. Finally, he lowered the pen onto the desk. His voice was cold, final. You're fired, Emily. Get out of my house. The words stabbed deeper than she had expected. Emily's chest collapsed inward. Her throat closed, but she managed to nod. Without another word, she turned, walking stiffly down the corridor and out the heavy double doors. The California sun hit her like a slap, hot and blinding. She boarded a crowded bus and sank into the last seat, pressing her hand against her mouth to muffle the sobs shaking her body. She wasn't crying for the job she had just lost, but for the man she had tried to save, the man too blind to see the cliff at his feet. Back inside the mansion, Michael stood rooted, the contract lying on the desk like a ticking bomb. Olivia picked up the pen and set it gently back into his hand. Sign it, darling, she whispered. Let's finish this. But Michael didn't move. He only stared at the paper, a deep unease gnawing at him. The silence in the house was heavier now, and the pen in his hand felt less like a tool and more like a weapon aimed at his own life. The following morning in Los Angeles carried with it the same polished calm as every other day in the Carter mansion, but to Emily Ross, nothing felt the same anymore. After leaving the house in tears the day before, she had spent the night tossing in her small apartment, unable to sleep. The whir of the ceiling fan above her bed was maddening. Her children asleep in the next room, their little breaths steady and peaceful, while her own heart thundered with dread. She had spoken the truth, screamed it in desperation, and still she had been cast out like trash. At dawn, she stood at her kitchen window, sipping weak coffee, staring at the cracked street outside. The bus rumbled past, neighbors walked dogs. Life went on, as though the world hadn't shifted beneath her feet. But inside, Emily's soul was raw. She thought of Michael's eyes, the flicker of doubt she had glimpsed before he turned against her. Had he believed her for even a second, or had her words already dissolved like smoke in the air? Meanwhile, at the mansion, Michael Carter sat alone in his office. The contract still rested on his desk, untouched since the chaotic interruption. He hadn't signed it yet. His wife, Olivia, moved gracefully through the house that morning, humming softly as though nothing unusual had happened. She wore a silk robe, her hair cascading in loose waves, pouring him coffee with the tender smile of a devoted spouse. To anyone watching, she was the image of perfection. But Michael couldn't forget the crack in her facade the moment Emily had spoken. He stirred sugar into his cup absent-mindedly, his mind replaying the maid's words. She said you'd lose everything. She said she would leave with him. The accusation burrowed under his skin, refusing to leave. Yet when he looked at Olivia, he saw only beauty and familiarity. He told himself it was impossible. They had built a life together. She had stood by him through the darkest storms of his business career. Could she really betray him? But doubt was a parasite. It gnawed at him through every sip of coffee, every glance at her smile. By midday, Michael drove into downtown Los Angeles for a board meeting, yet he barely heard a word anyone said. Numbers and charts blurred together. his mind stuck in the moment Emily's desperate cry had sliced through the silence. He excused himself early, claiming exhaustion. As he drove back along Wilshire Boulevard, the city's towering skyscrapers loomed like silent judges. At home, Olivia was already waiting. She met him at the door with a kiss, a soft brush of her lips against his cheek, and the faint scent of expensive perfume. "You look tired, love," she said sweetly, slipping her hand into his. "Why don't you let me handle dinner tonight? We'll open that bottle of wine you love." Michael nodded, though something inside recoiled. He remembered Emily's trembling words. She said you trusted her too much. She said you wouldn't even read the fine print. That evening, Olivia prepared his favorite pasta dish. She lit candles, played soft jazz in the background, and poured him a generous glass of wine. Her eyes sparkled across the table, her voice soothing as she asked about his day. To any outsider, the scene was the portrait of domestic bliss. But Michael chewed slowly, hardly tasting the food. He studied her, looking for cracks in the performance. Every laugh felt rehearsed, every caress too deliberate. After dinner, while Olivia disappeared upstairs, Michael wandered into the study. He poured himself another drink and sank into the leather armchair. The contract glared at him from the desk. He picked it up, reading through page after page, but the legal language was dense, intentionally confusing. Words like irrevocable transfer and joint holding leapt out at him, but he didn't understand their full weight. His gut twisted. For the first time in years, he felt powerless in his own house. Across town, in her modest apartment, Emily lay awake in the dark. Her children, Lucas and Victoria, slept soundly in the small room beside her. The peeling paint on the ceiling above her bed seemed to stare back, mocking her despair. She clutched the thin blanket torn between regret and fear. She had tried to save her employer. She had risked everything. And now she had nothing. But worse than losing her job was the gnawing certainty that disaster was still coming. Olivia's words from that overheard phone call echoed endlessly in her head. First he signs, then we leave. He won't suspect a thing. Emily rolled onto her side, tears wetting the pillow. She thought of Michael's children from his first marriage, now away at college. She thought of the kindness he had once shown her. Holiday bonuses, a small gift at Christmas, even a kind smile when she was exhausted from long hours. He didn't deserve to be ruined. But what could she do now? She was just a maid, dismissed in disgrace. Who would believe her if he didn't? Days began to crawl by. Michael tried to bury himself in work, but the seed of doubt had already sprouted. He noticed details he had overlooked before, the way Olivia was constantly checking her phone, the hushed calls she took in the upstairs bedroom, the sudden appearances of a manila folder she always tucked away before he entered the room. One night, long after midnight, Michael woke to the faint sound of Olivia's voice through the half-open study door. She was on the phone, whispering urgently. He crept down the hall, his bare feet silent against the marble floor. "Yes, it's all ready," she murmured. "He'll sign this week. After that, everything moves to my name. Just a little longer." Michael's blood ran cold. He leaned against the wall, heart pounding so loud he feared she'd hear. The voice on the other end of the call was low, male, laced with laughter. Olivia chuckled softly in reply, a sound Michael had not heard directed at him in years. When she hung up, Michael slipped silently back into the bedroom, his body trembling. He lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, his wife sleeping peacefully beside him, her face serene in the glow of morning light. For the first time, he wondered if Emily had been right all along, but suspicion alone was not enough. He needed proof. Proof strong enough to confront Olivia, to protect himself, to undo whatever trap she had woven. And somewhere in the city, in her small apartment, Emily Ross still held the fragments of that proof, photos she had taken in secret, scraps of paper salvaged from Olivia's trash, and most importantly, a recording on her old phone that she had hidden away out of fear. The question was, would Michael realize it in time? Or would Olivia's performance, her beauty and her lies pull him back into her web before the truth surfaced? The mansion, with its glass walls and shining chandeliers, had become a stage, and every player knew their lines. except Michael, who still hadn't decided which side of the script he belonged to. The city of Los Angeles woke beneath a pale sky, the streets buzzing with the usual rhythm of cars, billboards, and hurried footsteps. But inside the Carter mansion, the air was different. It was thick, almost suffocating, as though the walls themselves were holding a secret too heavy to bear. Michael Carter had not slept. He had lain awake in bed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, Olivia's soft breathing steady beside him. Her beauty had once been a comfort, a reminder of love and companionship. Now it was a mask, a performance that unsettled him more each day. Emily's desperate words still echoed inside his head. She said, "You would lose everything." She said she would leave with him. By morning, Michael's doubts had grown into something darker, suspicion laced with fear. He dressed in silence, slipped into his tailored suit and left the house earlier than usual. Olivia, still in her silk robe, kissed his cheek as though nothing were amiss. "Don't work too hard, darling," she whispered, her smile warm. But to Michael, that smile now carried the chill of calculation. He drove aimlessly at first, the city unfolding around him, his thoughts colliding like storm clouds. Eventually, he parked outside his father's old law office, a building now managed by a younger partner. Michael had not visited in years, but the memory of his father's advice echoed in his mind. Always know what you're signing. Trust is a luxury. Contracts are not. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. He spoke briefly with one of the lawyers. Asking him to review the contract Olivia had pressed him to sign. The young man scanned it, eyebrows furrowing as he flipped through the pages. "This isn't just a marital adjustment," the lawyer explained. "This essentially transfers control of your assets into joint ownership. Except, based on the clauses here, your wife would hold authority to act independently on financial matters. It's risky, Mr. Carter, very risky." Michael's stomach twisted. He left with the contract still in hand, the words rattling inside his skull. He could already hear Olivia's voice in his head. "It's just protection, Michael, for our future." But whose future? Meanwhile, across the city, Emily Ross was battling her own storm. Her apartment felt smaller than ever, the peeling paint on the walls mocking her despair. She had spent the last few days searching for work, knocking on doors, filling out applications, only to face rejection after rejection. The Carter name carried weight, and whispers of her dismissal traveled fast. At night, when her children were asleep, she sat alone at the tiny kitchen table, the glow of a single bulb above her. In front of her lay a shoebox, battered and old, filled with scraps she had collected from the mansion. A torn envelope with Olivia's handwriting, a crumpled note with a name, Bruno, a blurry photo she had secretly taken of Olivia's open laptop screen, showing the contract title, Transfer of Assets, Irrevocable, and most importantly her old cell phone, its cracked screen still functioning, with a saved recording she had captured by accident while cleaning near Olivia's door. Her fingers trembled as she played it back, the familiar voices filling the silence of the apartment. Olivia's voice was clear, sharp, unmistakably hers. "Once he signs, everything will be mine. He won't even question it." The male voice, deep and mocking, laughed in reply. "And when do we finally get rid of him?" Emily paused the recording, her heart hammering. She had proof. She could destroy Olivia's plan, expose the betrayal, and save Michael from ruin. But fear strangled her. Who would believe a maid? What court would trust her word over Olivia Carter's, a woman of beauty, wealth, and influence? Worse, what if Olivia found out? People who could deceive with such coldness were capable of far more than lies. The following day, Michael returned home earlier than expected. He entered quietly, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. From the hallway, he could hear Olivia in the living room, her voice low and sweet as she spoke on the phone. He paused, listening. "Yes, Bruno. Don't worry. He's starting to waver, but I'll push him through. By Friday it will be done. We'll have everything." Michael's chest tightened. The name, Bruno. The name Emily had cried out. He stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, his pulse pounding in his ears. He could no longer ignore the truth. Olivia's betrayal was real. That evening during dinner, he studied her more carefully than ever. Olivia laughed at his half-hearted jokes, touched his hand across the table, her eyes shining with feigned affection. She played her role flawlessly. But Michael saw the cracks now, the slight delay before her smile, the distant flicker in her gaze, the way her phone buzzed against the table, and she ignored it too quickly. When she excused herself to take a call upstairs, Michael slipped into her office. He scanned the desk, rifled through drawers. At first, nothing, just cosmetics, receipts, a leather-bound planner. Then he found it, a torn page stuffed inside a folder. Scribbled across it was a name, Bruno Torres. Next to it, a set of numbers that looked like bank account details. Michael's hands shook as he tucked the paper back, his mind racing. Who was Bruno? A lover? A co-conspirator? A thief? Perhaps all three? That night, lying beside Olivia in bed, Michael stared at the ceiling again, his body tense. She slept peacefully, her arm draped across him like chains of silk. His eyes drifted toward the contract on the dresser, the pages glowing faintly in the moonlight. He realized then that the decision before him was no longer about signing or not signing, it was about survival. Across town, Emily stared into her cracked bathroom mirror, splashing water on her tired face. She whispered to herself as though rehearsing, "You have to tell him again. You can't let this happen." But the memory of Michael's cold dismissal cut her down. What if he turned her away once more? What if Olivia discovered her interference and retaliated? She thought of her children, their futures fragile as glass. Fear clawed at her, but so did conscience. She had already spoken once and been silenced. Could she live with herself if she stayed silent now? The city lights flickered outside both their windows. Michael trapped in a mansion of lies, Emily in a cramped apartment of fear. Their fates were entwined, bound by a truth that neither could escape. And as Friday drew closer, the day Olivia had promised Bruno that the contract would be signed, both Michael and Emily knew that time was running out. The house of glass and stone had become a ticking bomb. All it would take was one signature to detonate it. The week pressed forward with the weight of inevitability. Each day that passed felt like another stone laid upon Michael Carter's chest, another tick of the clock drawing him closer to the edge of disaster. The Carter mansion, once a symbol of his triumph, had become a cage where shadows whispered and lies lingered in every polished corner. On Tuesday morning, Michael sat alone at the breakfast table. The room was filled with sunlight pouring through the glass walls, bouncing off the sleek countertops and stainless steel appliances. It should have been a scene of comfort, but instead it was suffocating. Olivia glided into the kitchen like a vision from a lifestyle magazine, her silk blouse flawless, her hair falling in gentle waves, her perfume drifting behind her like an invisible crown. She carried a plate of fresh fruit, placing it before him with a tender smile. "Eat, darling," she said softly. "You've been so tense lately." Michael forced a nod, spearing a piece of melon with his fork. His eyes studied her every move, the way she sat perfectly poised, the deliberate way she touched his hand, the practiced warmth in her voice. On the surface, she was the perfect wife. But he had heard enough in the last few days to know the truth. In his pocket, folded tightly, was the slip of paper he had found in her office drawer with the name Bruno Torres. He had memorized the numbers scribbled beside it. Bank accounts maybe, or codes. Whatever it was a connection to the shadow lurking behind Olivia's flawless smile. As he chewed slowly, his mind wandered back to Emily Ross. He pictured her trembling in the doorway of his office, her eyes wide with desperation as she cried, "Don't sign it!" He had dismissed her, fired her, shamed her, but her words were now carved into him like scars. Later that afternoon, unable to stand the suffocating silence, Michael left the mansion. He drove through the sprawling streets of Los Angeles, the city alive with people who had no idea his world was teetering on collapse. He pulled into a quiet cafe, one he had once visited with his late father. Sitting in the corner booth, he ordered black coffee and unfolded the contract once more. The words blurred. irrevocable transfer, joint holding with independent authority. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. It was dangerous. If he signed, Olivia would hold power. The lawyer he had consulted had not exaggerated. This wasn't protection. It was surrender. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from Olivia. Dinner at 8. Don't be late, love. A small heart emoji followed, as though to soften the command. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Emily Ross sat in her cramped living room. The curtains were drawn, her children playing quietly in the corner with crayons and scraps of paper. Emily held her old cell phone in her hands, the cracked screen glowing faintly. She pressed play once again, listening to Olivia's recorded voice. He's pathetic. He'll sign without even reading. Emily's chest tightened. She knew she held something powerful, something that could save Michael and destroy Olivia's plan. But fear clawed at her. What if Olivia found out? What if Michael refused to believe her again? She had already been humiliated once. Did she dare risk it a second time? Her son, Lucas, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mommy, are you sad?" Emily forced a smile, wiping her tears quickly. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's just tired," but inside she knew the truth. She wasn't just tired, she was terrified. On Wednesday, the pressure grew heavier. Olivia spent the day making arrangements. She called the family's new lawyer, Eduardo, a slick man with sharp suits and an even sharper tongue. He arrived at the mansion with a briefcase and spent hours with Olivia behind closed doors. Michael, passing through the hallway, caught fragments of their conversation. "By Friday," Eduardo said, his voice calm, "it will all be finalized. He won't even realize what he signed until it's too late." Michael's pulse hammered in his ears. He pressed his back against the wall, his breath shallow. Olivia's reply was smooth, confident. "Good. Once it's done, Bruno and I will have everything." The name again, Bruno. Hearing it from her lips sent a knife of certainty through Michael's chest. There was no longer room for doubt. Emily had told the truth. Olivia was plotting against him, and she wasn't even hiding it anymore. That night, Michael couldn't eat. He pushed his food around the plate as Olivia chattered cheerfully about redecorating the pool house. She laughed easily, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight, while Michael sat in silence, his thoughts spiraling. Each time she called him darling, it felt like poison dripping into his ears. After dinner, when she retreated upstairs, Michael poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in the darkened study. He stared at the contract, his reflection faint in the glass of the framed photographs lining the wall. Photos of his late father, his company's achievements, the life he had built. Would all of it vanish with a single signature? His mind returned again and again to Emily. She had proof. She must have. She had spoken with too much certainty, too much fear, for it to have been only suspicion. But where was she now? He had fired her, driven her away. And even if he found her, would she help him after the way he had treated her? Across town, Emily wrestled with the same torment. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the shoebox of evidence hidden beneath it. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over Michael's number in her contacts. But she hesitated. He hadn't believed her before. Would he believe her now? Or would she risk everything again, only to be cast aside once more? On Thursday, the mansion buzzed with activity. Olivia had scheduled a dinner party for several of Michael's business associates, a calculated move to project the image of a happy, thriving couple. Emily's replacement, a new maid, young and timid, scurried about, setting the table and polishing silverware. Michael, dressed in his suit, mingled with the guests, but his mind was elsewhere. He watched Olivia glide through the crowd, her laughter echoing like music, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To everyone else, she was the picture of grace and devotion. To Michael, she was a predator wearing silk. As the evening dragged on, Michael slipped away to his office. He closed the door and dialed a number he hadn't called in years, his sister Catherine. She had always distrusted Olivia, warning him that her charm was too polished, too perfect. He had brushed off her concerns. Now his voice trembled as he confessed. "Catherine," he whispered, "I think you were right. About Olivia. About everything." There was silence on the line. Then her sharp reply, "Michael, tell me everything, now." For the first time, he poured out the truth, the contract, Emily's warning, Olivia's whispered phone calls. Catherine listened quietly, then spoke with fierce resolve. "You need proof, Michael. Hard proof. Otherwise, she'll bury you in lies." Her words struck deep. Proof, the very thing Emily possessed, that night, after the guests had gone and Olivia slept soundly beside him. Michael sat in the dark, staring at his phone. His thumb hovered over Emily's old number. Finally, with a deep breath, he dialed. The line rang once, twice. Then the cold voice of the operator. "This number is no longer in service." Michael dropped his head into his hands, despair crashing over him. He had cast out the only person who could save him. Friday was approaching, the day of reckoning, and somewhere in the city, Emily Ross still held the key to his salvation, if only he could find her before it was too late. Friday dawned heavy, with storm clouds gathering over Los Angeles. The city bustled as it always did, traffic crawling on the 405, sirens wailing faintly in the distance, helicopters slicing through the sky. But inside the Carter mansion, the silence was oppressive, like the calm before a storm that promised devastation. Michael Carter woke before sunrise. Sitting upright in bed with his head cradled in his hands, Olivia still slept beside him, her breath slow, her face serene, untouched by the turmoil consuming him. To anyone else, she looked like an angel at rest. To Michael, she looked like a mask, flawless, beautiful, and false. He rose quietly, dressing in a pale blue shirt and dark slacks, the same attire he wore on days when major decisions loomed. He walked down the grand staircase, his hand trailing along the marble rail, and entered his office. The contract lay waiting on the desk, its crisp pages filled with promises of protection, but laced with the venom of betrayal. He sat before it, his pen lying beside the folder like a loaded weapon. All week, Olivia had pressed him. All week, she had whispered in his ear about love, safety, their future. And all week, Emily Ross's desperate cry echoed louder in his head, "Don't sign it." The name Bruno Torres scratched at his mind like a splinter. Who was he really? A lover? A thief? A predator hiding behind Olivia's smile? Michael didn't know, but he intended to find out. By mid-morning, Olivia descended the stairs dressed impeccably in a white dress that clung to her like armor, her hair twisted into a perfect chignon. She looked every bit the devoted wife, glowing and composed. She kissed Michael's cheek, her perfume enveloping him. "Today's the day," she said softly, her voice sweet, though her eyes glinted with urgency. "Eduardo will be here this afternoon with the final draft. Let's put this behind us once and for all." Michael forced a smile, but his chest tightened. Across the city, in a cramped apartment with peeling paint, Emily Ross sat at her kitchen table with the shoebox of evidence spread before her, the old cell phone with the cracked screen, the photo of Olivia's open laptop showing the contract title, the torn envelope with Bruno Torres scrawled in Olivia's handwriting. Each piece was a shard of truth, sharp and dangerous. Her children, Lucas and Victoria, ate cereal quietly at the small table. Lucas looked up, milk dribbling down his chin. "Mommy, are you going back to work today?" Emily hesitated. "No, sweetheart. Mommy doesn't work there anymore because of that lady." Victoria asked softly, her big brown eyes full of questions she couldn't yet understand. Emily's throat tightened. She brushed her daughter's hair back and forced a smile. "Something like that, my love. Now finish your breakfast." But inside, Emily was at war with herself. She had proof. She had the power to stop Olivia, but fear still gripped her. Olivia was dangerous. Her lies, her charm, her confidence could crush someone like Emily. And Michael had already thrown her out once, humiliating her in front of the very person she was trying to save. Did she dare risk it all again? Still, as she stared at her children, she knew silence was no longer an option. She had been carrying this burden alone, and it was tearing her apart. By the end of the day, Olivia would have Michael's signature. And once that happened, there would be no undoing it, she whispered under her breath. As though to gather courage, "I have to try one more time." At noon, Michael's sister Catherine arrived at the mansion. She was a sharp woman in her mid-40s, her dark hair cut into a sleek bob, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had fought her share of battles. She had always distrusted Olivia, and now when Michael confessed the full story, she was furious. "I warned you, Michael," she said, pacing the office. "From the very beginning, I told you she was too perfect, too polished. And now you see. But you can't just sit here. You need proof." Michael leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "Proof? That's the problem. I don't have any. All I have are suspicions, and the word of a maid I fired. Olivia will twist everything. She'll make me look paranoid, insane." Catherine stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "Where is she? This maid, Emily. If she knew enough to warn you once, she knows more. Find her, Michael, before it's too late." Michael stared at his sister, the memory of Emily's tear-streaked face haunting him. He had driven her out, but she had been right all along. By mid-afternoon, the mansion prepared itself for Eduardo's arrival. The lawyer came promptly at 3 o'clock, striding into the house with his briefcase, his tailored suit immaculate. His handshake was firm, his smile professional but cold. He followed Olivia into the office, where Michael and Catherine sat waiting. Olivia's voice was light, reassuring. "Michael, love, let's finalize this. Eduardo has everything prepared. It's simple, just a signature, and we can move forward with our lives." Eduardo opened the briefcase and spread the papers across the desk. "Mr. Carter, these are standard revisions, nothing out of the ordinary. You'll see here." He tapped the final page with a pen. "You simply sign here, and the process is complete." Michael stared at the page. The words swam before his eyes, meaningless yet menacing. He glanced at Olivia, who stood behind Eduardo with her hands folded gracefully, her expression calm but watchful. Catherine's eyes burned into him. "Don't sign, Michael. Not until you know the truth." The room thickened with silence. Michael's hand hovered near the pen, his pulse hammering in his ears. He could hear Emily's voice, desperate and trembling. "Please don't sign that contract." At that moment the doorbell rang. Olivia frowned, irritated by the interruption. "We're not expecting anyone," the butler answered, returning moments later with wide eyes. "It's a woman, ma'am. She says she must speak to Mr. Carter immediately. She won't leave." Michael's heart skipped. He stood quickly, striding toward the foyer. And there, standing with rain dripping from her hair, her uniform still worn, though she no longer worked there, was Emily Ross. Her eyes were fierce, her hands clutching a battered shoebox to her chest. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I have proof. Everything she's planning, it's all in here." The world seemed to stop. Olivia's face drained of color, her smile faltering for the first time. Eduardo shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening around his briefcase. Catherine's lips curved into a grim smile. Michael looked at Emily, then at the box she held. His chest tightened with shame, regret, and a spark of hope. He had dismissed her once. He would not make the same mistake again. "Come in," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Show me." And with that, the fragile balance inside the Carter mansion shattered. The heavy doors of the Carter mansion closed behind Emily Ross with a hollow echo, sealing her inside the house she once cleaned, but now entered as something more, a bearer of truth. She stood in the marble foyer, water dripping from her hair, her old shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The battered shoebox in her arms felt heavier than stone, filled not with belongings, but with secrets that could decide the fate of the man, standing only a few feet away. Michael Carter looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a maid in uniform, not as a background figure in his perfect mansion, but as someone who had stepped into fire for him. Shame burned in his chest. He remembered the way he had humiliated her, firing her with cold words, while his wife looked on with smug satisfaction. Yet here she was again, trembling but unbroken, her eyes locked on his with fierce determination. Behind him, Olivia's heels clicked sharply against the marble as she stepped forward, her face twisted in a smile that was all teeth and venom. "Michael," she said smoothly, "this is absurd. She has no right to be here. Throw her out before she embarrasses herself further." Catherine, standing nearby, crossed her arms and cut in sharply. "No, Olivia. She stays." Her voice carried the steel of a woman who had always distrusted her brother's wife. Emily clutched the shoebox tighter. "I know you don't trust me," she said to Michael, her voice cracking, "but everything I told you before, it was true. And I can prove it." The tension in the air was suffocating. Olivia's hands curled into fists, her polished nails digging into her palms. Eduardo, the slick lawyer seated at the desk, shifted uneasily in his chair, sensing the shift in power. Michael nodded slowly, his voice low but firm. "Show me." Emily walked into the office, her steps unsteady but resolute. She placed the shoebox on the desk, pushing aside the gleaming contract Eduardo had laid out. One by one, she pulled out the contents. First, the crumpled envelope with Olivia's handwriting. "I found this in the trash," Emily said, laying it flat. "Your wife had been writing to someone named Bruno Torres." That name came up again and again in her phone calls. Michael's face hardened at the sound of the name. He had heard it himself, whispered late at night. In moments when Olivia thought he wasn't listening, Emily pulled out the photograph next, a blurry shot from her old cell phone. It showed Olivia's laptop, the contract document open on the screen. At the top, the words glared like a warning: "Transfer of assets, irrevocable." "I didn't understand everything," Emily admitted, her voice trembling, "but I knew it wasn't just about marriage or protection. It was about giving her everything." Olivia laughed suddenly, the sound sharp and brittle. "This is ridiculous. A blurry photo, a scrap of paper. Michael, you're going to let this woman, this maid, convince you to throw away our life together." But Emily wasn't finished. She reached into the box once more and pulled out the cracked old cell phone. She set it on the desk and looked Michael in the eye. "This is what matters. I recorded something, by accident at first, but I saved it. A call she made with Bruno. You need to hear it." The room seemed to hold its breath as Emily pressed play. Static crackled, then Olivia's unmistakable voice filled the office. "Yes, he'll sign. He has no idea. Once it's done, everything will be in my name. The house, the cars, even the company." A deep male voice followed, mocking and cruel. "And after that, when do we finally get rid of him?" Michael's blood turned to ice. He staggered back a step, staring at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. Olivia's face paled, but she quickly forced a laugh, her voice sharp. "That's doctored. You think a maid with an old phone can produce real evidence? Michael, don't be foolish." But the room had already shifted. Catherine's eyes blazed with fury. Eduardo's mask of professionalism slipped, sweat glistening at his temple. Michael's chest heaved as he replayed the words in his head, his wife's voice dripping with contempt, planning his ruin. He turned to Olivia, his voice hoarse but cutting. How long have you been planning this?" Olivia's smile faltered. For a heartbeat, the mask cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "You're pathetic, Michael," she spat, her voice no longer sweet but sharp as broken glass. "Always so desperate to believe in love, in loyalty. Do you know how easy it was to play you? To make you think you were the perfect husband? All I had to do was smile and stroke your ego, and you handed me everything," Catherine gasped. Emily's eyes filled with tears. And Michael, his fists clenched at his sides, felt something inside him shatter. Eduardo stood abruptly, gathering his papers. I should go," he muttered, but Michael's voice stopped him cold. "Sit down." For the first time, the power in the room belonged to Michael. He had been blind, but now he saw clearly. He looked at Emily, her face streaked with tears, but shining with resolve. "Thank you," he whispered, the weight of his shame pressing into those two words. Olivia sneered, her beauty twisted with rage. "You think you can stop me? You think some recording and a few scraps of paper will undo what I've already set in motion? It's too late, Michael. Everything is already mine." But Michael no longer felt powerless. He turned to Catherine. "Call Felipe." Catherine nodded, pulling out her phone. Felipe, the family's old lawyer, the man Olivia had forced out, was waiting for this moment. With Emily's evidence and Olivia's own confession, there was a chance to fight back. As Catherine stepped into the hallway to make the call, Michael faced Olivia one last time. His voice was steady now, no longer the voice of a man ensnared, but of a man who had woken from a long nightmare. "You've taken enough from me," he said coldly. "But you won't take everything." Olivia's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smile that was both beautiful and deadly. "We'll see." The storm outside broke at that moment, rain pounding against the glass walls of the mansion, thunder rolling across the hills. Inside, the war had begun, not just for Michael's fortune, but for his dignity, his legacy, and the truth that Emily had risked everything to bring into the light.